Okay, everyone, welcome to our special meeting of the Santa Monica Democratic Club. And as we always start, good evening, Democrats.
Good
Good evening,
evening,
Democrats.
Democrats.
That was pretty good, but I still think we can do a second one better. Let's try it one more time. Good evening, Democrats.
Good evening,
Democrats.
Okay,
Democrats.
that was good. There was some extra enthusiasm there. So for those who don't know, it's a special meeting. I'm assuming you all know because you're here, but we're going to get to that in just a second. Just wanted to make sure everyone knows 1 week from now, we'll be having our monthly membership meeting where we'll be having our debate for the county supervisor's race. And actually, one of the candidates in that race is no longer able to join us that evening. So we'll be having a head-to-head race with Henry Stern and Lindsay Horvath. And then we'll also be hearing from Mark Levine, who's running for the insurance commissioner, and we'll also be hearing from Yvonne Yu, who's running for state controller. We have our next meeting after that on April 13th, and the next meeting after that is on April 27th, and that's the meeting that you want to be at because that's when we're going to be voting on all these primaries for the June 7th ballot. So mark your calendar for April 27th. We'll talk more about it next week. But tonight we're going to discuss this opportunity here in Santa Monica for a ballot measure. And I'm actually one of the proponents of this measure. So I want to, step down from my role as chair right now so that I can talk to you about it with some of our other colleagues. So with that said, the next senior ranking member of the club who would take over is Mike Soloff, but he's also one of the proponents. So the next person in line right now tonight would be our VP of Diversity and Inclusion, Raina Kirkland. So I'm going to pass over the chairing duties to Raina, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, John. And as much as I appreciate that, I think that the best person to facilitate the meeting would be our VP of Legislation, Isabel Story. So if it's okay, I'd like to pass the torch to you.
Okay, well, I guess I have no one to pass the torch to, so I will take it. It's very nice to see this good turnout. It's very exciting that 3 of our esteemed members are actually crafting a ballot initiative, get it on the ballot for us to vote on. And so we are going to hear more about it, have a chance to ask questions, and then decide not if we want to support the measure yet, but just if we want to support the gathering of signatures to get it placed on the ballot. So for the presentation, I'm going to introduce our 3 members who are sponsoring this ballot initiative. We have Sue Himmelrich, our member and mayor of Santa Monica. John Katz, I think we know him, president of our club. And Mike Soloff, who is our VP of membership and is also co-chair of SMER. So take it away.
Thanks, Isabel. Good to be back. I just wanted to start before we get to the presentation and say how honored I was that Mike and Sue approached me to join them on this. I think it's a really great opportunity, not just for our club, obviously, but for Santa Monica. We'll get into the details, but I just wanted to say how great of an opportunity I feel like this is, and we're going to get into the details now. I guess, Mike, did you want to present? I don't know, Sue, did you have any? We didn't really discuss who goes first, so.
I'm trying to unmute. So we had a pretty late night last night, and I had a pretty full day today. And as we all know, Michael is more precise than I am, especially when I'm exhausted and he's not. So I think that Michael will present and I will chime in as necessary. But we also have Denny Zane, who is a big engineer in this, and I'm hoping Denny will bail us out and especially me, Denny, okay?
Okay, well, I think it's on me, and I prepared a PowerPoint. I apologize in advance that I don't have every detail. I know there were a bunch of questions that we appreciate folks giving us ahead of time. Hopefully I'll hit on some significant number of those, but we're obviously open to that. But recognizing, something important here, which is that you have 3 people who all have other jobs, but who care enough about this issue to take our time and effort to try and bring this to the voters of Santa Monica. So I hope you'll give us a little bit of a pass for that. We have no paid staff. We're just volunteers doing this because we passionately care about it. So do I have a screen sharing ability?
Yeah,
Looks like I did.
You're good to go, yeah.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Let me go to slideshow mode. Okay. So that's actually in the initiative. That's what it's called. So before we get into what it actually does, I wanted to tell people why it is we're motivated to do this. And I think whether it's people who know from my time on the Housing Commission for 7 years, or from discussions at this club about affordable housing issues in the city of Santa Monica, I want to start with what I think is a really important fundamental point. A lot of people assume that because in order to become a resident of Santa Monica today, in whether it's ownership or market rate rental housing, one has to be pretty well off, that Santa Monica is made up of only well-off people, and that's not true. As I think most of you know, the majority of the population in Santa Monica lives in rental housing, close to 70%. And according to HUD's Community Housing Assessment Survey data, 2 out of every 10 of those Santa Monica renter households are both low income, and they're paying more than half of that limited income for rent and utilities. And another 1 out of 10 Santa Monica renters are both low income and pay more than 30%, but less than half of their income. And here you can see I didn't have a chance to proofread this, and my second bullet doesn't say that correctly. But the point is, HUD defines rent burden as more than 30% of your income up to 50%, and then severe rent burden as over 50%. So 2 out of every 10 renter households in Santa Monica are severely rent burdened. These are low income people paying more than half of that for rent and utilities. And another 1 in 10 are paying somewhere more than 30%, up to 50%. The data doesn't break it down between that. And here's the actual chart that's available on the HUD website if you filter for Santa Monica. And you can see that what we're talking about here is that this is concentrated, but not exclusively, in those who are most severely low income, people who have less than 30% of the median income. And you can see that HUD's estimating we have almost 4,000 such households in our city, paying more than half of that for rent, and another almost 1,600 of those folks who are paying more than 30%, up to 50%. And you can see that we also have other low income people. You put it all together, we're talking thousands upon thousands upon thousands of our neighbors who are here right now, who are paying inordinate sums to live in their existing housing compared to their incomes. So what does that mean for them? Well, one of the things it means for them and for all of us is that there's a lot of pressure driving people into the streets when they face this severe rent burden. We have a lot of people who are one major shock away from losing their housing because they're so already rent burdened. And we don't have specific data for Santa Monica, but in the last homelessness count that was conducted in LA County prior to COVID, so this is all pre-COVID, none of this is exacerbated by COVID, although I'm sure that has not helped. We learned two things. One is that when I think probably all of us, certainly the Dem Club endorsed it, supported County Measure H, which raised $350 million a year for homeless services and the like, we're actually are able to move people from the streets into housing at a much greater rate than we ever have. The problem is that people are falling into homelessness at an even faster rate than ever before, which is why our homeless population continues to grow despite all of these efforts. And in that last pre-COVID count, which occurred in January 2020, well, what they found out was that 2/3 of the unsheltered adults were people who were homeless for the first time. So this wasn't long-term, people who've been on the streets forever, but these were people who just become homeless. And that, almost 60% of them said that economic hardship was the cause. So you put those two numbers together, it basically means that 40% of the homeless adults that were counted that year were people who were homeless for the first time, and they were driven into the streets by their economic circumstances. And by the way, the kind of rent burden that I'm talking about in Santa Monica is actually, believe it or not, better than in the city of LA and the county as a whole. If you look in those two places, we actually have 3 out of every 10 renters who are both low income and severely rent burdened, that is paying more than 50% of their income for rent and utilities. And another 2 out of 10 of those renters who are paying more than 30% up to 50% and are low income. We actually have 500,000 such households in the county of Los Angeles. So what does this mean? Well, this is kind of intuitive. Obviously, if you're spending all of that money on housing and you don't have a very big income to begin with, you're going to be underinvesting in your nutrition, your health, and the education of you or your children. And here are just some statistics about that from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. I won't take the time now to delve into that. That's not really essential. The point is, it's obvious when people are suffering that kind of rent burden, they have to cut back on other necessities of life. Another thing that happens is it leads to people living in overcrowded conditions, either because they take smaller places than they need to try and minimize their rent, or oftentimes, multi-generational families or even unrelated families could be living together, not because, that's how they want to do it. There's nothing wrong with that. There are people who like multi-generational, housing situations, but because it's the only way to try and get by. And when you have those kinds of conditions, they have a particularly negative impact on children and their ability to thrive. Obviously, homelessness, which we talked about, that this kind of rent burden increases, is associated with cognitive and mental problems, physical health problems, poor school performance, etc. So it's a particular issue both and the stress of growing up in an environment where whoever's in charge of the household is stressed about being able to simply survive and stay sheltered, adds to that problem. So this is a particular issue for children. So what doesn't work to deal with this problem for low-income households? There are a whole wide variety of views in our community and otherwise about the role that increased market rate housing has. What is clear is that it's not going to reduce rents to the point where it's going to address the problem for low income residents. And so here's a quote from McKinsey Global Institute, which is a complete believer that we should be doing all of the things to have more market rate housing because of dealing with the, what I would call the other housing affordability cost crisis in California, or some people would say crisis, some people would say not. I don't want to take a position on that because I don't think it's material to what we're talking about tonight. You know, whether people like my children and most of us on this call pay more or less for ownership housing, for market rate rentals, that's a whole different issue. But what I think everybody, I hope, can agree on, and what the evidence shows, is that if we're going to deal with low-income people who are facing these severe rent burdens and the like, we have to directly invest and intervene in that. So what does work for those folks? Two things. One is rent subsidy, and the other is deed restricted affordable housing. And, you know, at the federal level, rent subsidy is the Section 8 program. We have started a local pilot program, our so-called Preserve Our Diversity program, which I'll talk about a little bit more after that, where, you know, someone's in the private marketplace, but the government provides a portion of income for those folks so that they are not spending inordinate amounts of their limited income for rent and utilities, but instead are able to have enough money left over after that to meet the other necessities of life. And then, of course, the other is actual deed restricted affordable housing. That is units where the rent is below market, so that people can afford, who are at lower income, can afford to live there. And, you know, again, this is sort of, I think, common sense, but, you know, here's again empirical figures from studies that were done. In this particular study, it was using the Section 8 voucher program, but obviously you accomplish the same thing from deed restricted affordable housing. And what are the impacts of taking this rent burden off people? You can see that, and this was particularly about families with children, that, you know, we're reducing the number of families that live in shelters around the streets by 75%. By the way, obviously the Section 8 program is, in a sense, less effective than deed restricted affordable housing because you do have to find a unit. But even that program, which is just out in the private marketplace with subsidy 3/4, you know, they talk here about not only people who are on the street, but also whether they're overcrowded because they have to couch serve or share apartments, whatever, reduces that by 80%. It reduces families living in crowded conditions by more than half. And it reduces the number of times that families have to move on average in this particular study by close to 40%. And that, of course, I guess I can say from my own life as a child moving, which wasn't all that. I always found that, and having to go to a new school or just with all of that, a stressful experience. That's obviously reducing that is also beneficial for everyone, but particularly children. What else do we know works? Well, we know that when we move low-income households out of concentrated areas of poverty into high resource communities with excellent public schools, there are a lot of benefits for them. There actually is empirical research indicating that there are positive effects even for the adults on labor force participation and employment, and getting them into higher resource communities like Santa Monica. There are empirical research indicating that for children who are moved from those kinds of areas into high resource communities, or are able to stay, such as our low income children who are already in our community, if they're able to stay here in a high resource community, it will have positive effects on educational attainment, on their lifetime earnings, and their lifetime family stability. And interestingly, I appreciate Patricia Hoffman brought this to my attention. There's actually now medical research indicating that there's actual physiological differences in the brains of children who live in high resource communities like ours versus disadvantaged neighborhoods in terms of their neurocognitive performance and even the size of their cortical surface area and their subcortical volume. And I'm not a doctor, so I can't explain exactly what all that means. The bottom line is that those are good things to have higher neurocognitive performance and greater cortical surface area and subcortical volume. And I'm particularly interested, this was a study that was published just in May 2021 in the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics, or JAMA Pediatrics. And the lead author, Daniel Hackman, is actually a graduate of the Santa Monica Public School System. So what kinds of rent subsidy programs and deed restricted affordable housing, how do we make that happen? We have right now, we're in the second phase of our POD pilot program. That program started as a program targeted at seniors who were living in these rent burdened conditions and were low income. I think we actually cut it off at even more than just low income, but very low income. And for basically a little over $1 million a year, we're able to help 179 households, 152 of which are single seniors and 27 of which were senior couples. And here's just some calculations that show you what we can do. So for that little over $1 million, we're able to help these 179 households based on the costs of acquisition and rehabilitation in Santa Monica. Our most recent thing, you can see that that's much more expensive over time. We will start building up units, and we also have new senior units that we've built using money from the Housing Trust Fund. UL means unleveraged. That would be if we had to pay all of the costs. We, the city, leveraged is we often, if not almost exclusively, do these projects using tax credits as well as city funds, which obviously allows us to get more units for the senior units. And we also do multifamily bedroom units. And again, we have figures here, unleveraged and leveraged. And the metric for all of these, the pod being senior units and the new senior units are units. The others are bedrooms, because ultimately, if this is about helping people, what matters is not counting how many units, but how many people we're helping, and bedrooms is probably the closest metric to that. So for example, if we build, larger apartments for families in Santa Monica, it obviously costs more to create a new, multi-bedroom unit, but on a per bedroom basis, it's actually less expensive to do that. And that means more people are going to be helped. And just before we talk about a few other things, I do want to remind all of us what this really means, being in this circumstance of being rent burdened and low income. And this was something from the first phase of the POD program, which only had about 17 participants and whatever, but a number of them chose to voluntarily write something to the city about their experience about a year after they started into it. And I'm always struck by this, and I want you all to hear it as well, so that we can keep in mind what it really means for people to be in that circumstance. So here's what one of the participants said of her experience once we did provide a rent subsidy to her. And she said, quote, "I find that I'm constantly pinching myself. Knowing that I will be able to pay my rent every month just blows my mind. I can't thank you and everyone else involved in the POD program enough. So far, it's been the little things that I am finding joy in, such as paper towels, leaving more than one light on in the living room, and picking up something from the market that wasn't on my monthly list." So, We can talk about a lot of theoretical things, but this is what people's real lives are and what the difference to them is if we can intervene and help them, whether it's through rent subsidy or whether it's through giving them new units that have, affordable rent. So what does it take to do these things, to have these interventions on behalf of low and also moderate income families? Because in Santa Monica, of course, our rents aren't affordable to moderate income either, which is generally defined as people earning 120% of the, up to 120% of the median income. So I wanted to just go through a little history of the efforts that the city has made. I think it's first important to keep in mind that the voters back in 1990 passed Proposition R, which puts in our city charter, and it's still there today, that the city council is to assure that 30% of all new multifamily housing constructed each year in the city is affordable to and occupied by low and moderate income households. Now, at that time, our existing housing stock, almost all of the rent control stock and close to 80% of all rental units in the city were actually affordable to low and moderate income households because we had something called vacancy control. The state preempted that in 1999. And as a result of that, in our market rate units, there are just no initial rents in Santa Monica, whether it's in our older rent controlled units or our newer, newly constructed units that are affordable to lower income households without rent subsidy or except for deed restricted affordable housing. But my point is this, which is that what I believe the sentiment was, and it's certainly my sentiment of why we have this in our charter, is because we don't want to live in an economically gated community. We want Santa Monica to remain an economically diverse community, and that's the sentiment that's expressed in Proposition R. I can certainly say that's one of the reasons why Sue and I chose to move to Santa Monica as opposed to living in Brentwood or Pacific Palisades or any place like that, because we really do have economic diversity here, and we value that. And I think the voters do, because that's why they put it in the charter. And so to do that, the city council did a couple of things. They, in 1992, adopted an inclusionary deed restricted affordable housing requirement, or so-called affordable housing production program, which says that a certain portion of new market rate developments either needs to be set aside or in some other way provide for a share of deed restricted affordable housing units as well. And the city was also spending its own money to try and create new affordable housing units, typically through organizations such as Community Corporation of Santa Monica and others. And we were spending, prior to 2012 and the Great Recession, more than $15 million a year from redevelopment funds on deed restricted affordable housing. The state required that we spend about half that much. That was part of their program. But this community, because this community really wanted to maintain a place for people of all economic levels to be able to live, was spending twice that much. And 15 million may not sound like that much, but if we gross that up to the state, that would be approximately $6 billion per year. Unfortunately, the state isn't spending anywhere near that on the affordable housing on any sort of ongoing basis. And of course, as you can see, even with doing that, it only got us so far. But in 2012, the state took that away. In 2014, there was a first attempt to go to the voters to see if we could get some of that money back. This was so-called measures H and HH, not to be confused with the county measures. This was a local measure. And what it was going to do was increase our transfer tax when property is transferred from 0.3% to 0.9% on properties that were sold for $1 million or more. And that was rejected by Santa Monica voters by a 57.5% to 42.5% margin. In 2016, a new measure was brought to the voters, measures GS and GSH, which was an increase in the sales tax in Santa Monica by 0.5 cent. And that did pass with 62+% of the vote. That was a general tax. And then there was an advisory measure saying that the community wanted the city council to spend half that money for rent subsidy, affordable housing purposes, and half for the public schools. And it's from those monies that we were able to create the Pod 2 pilot program that I discussed earlier. Our city council also, there was some one-time return of RDA money, loan repayments. Richard Bloom, among others, made that happen in Sacramento. These were not ongoing funds. And our city council put all of those into the Housing Trust Fund because of the commitment of this community to affordable housing. But those have now been expended or otherwise taken away. That's not an ongoing source. So if we want to seriously intervene to help lower income folks who are here in Santa Monica and are facing severe rent burden, as well as to do a couple of other things, which is to, assure that at least 30% of our new housing is for lower and moderate income persons, both as a general matter and to advance our right of return program, which is meant to allow people who are displaced by the creation of the Civic Center and the Superior Courthouse and by the 10 freeway, many of whom were people of color because that was the neighborhoods in town through which those projects were particularly done. And if we want to say to our low income workforce in the city of Santa Monica, who all of us who live here are benefiting from, not just because we like going to their restaurants or where they're working or stores or something like that, but because a very significant portion of the general revenue of the city, even now with COVID killing the hotel industry and sales, although hopefully we're coming out of that, and certainly before that, we were getting an awful lot of our general revenue income from what's called the transit occupancy tax. That's a tax on people staying in hotels, and our sales tax. So why are we able to receive that money and all of us enjoy the benefits of that? Well, because you have to have, people who wait on tables and wash dishes, and to the extent there's still brick and mortar, wait on customers and clean rooms in hotels and park cars and do all of those kinds of lower wage things. So we're all benefiting from that. There's no new place unless we create it for those folks to be able to afford to live in our city. And, at least from my perspective, I don't want them having to travel, 2 hours each way and be away from their kids just to find some place where they can live. I think they also have sweat equity in our city, and we should make a place for them consistent with what we put in the charter, and so that their children can benefit from our great public schools and get all of those benefits. So what is the ballot measure we're proposing? Well, it's going to create a dedicated ongoing local funding source for homeless prevention, affordable housing in the public schools. And just from a sort of political legal point of view, if this is placed on the ballot, it will be through citizens signing petitions that they want this on the ballot. And the consequence of that is sort of twofold. One is under existing law, that means it will take a majority vote to pass that, unlike if it was put on by, say, the city council, which would make it require 2/3 vote. And the other piece of it is that it's not just advisory what the money is used for, because this would be a voter initiative. this would actually be that these funds need to go to that. And while our city has been pretty good on honoring the views of the voters, it's from my perspective better to have a guarantee. So what is the particular funding source in this case? We're talking about an increase in the transfer tax. It will only apply to sales or transfers of Santa Monica property that's worth $8 million or more. And for those high-end property transfers, there will be an increase by 5% to a total tax of 5.6%. In 2020, just to remind folks, there was a measure that was passed by the voters called Measure SM, and that increased the transfer tax from 0.3% to 0.6% for properties of $5 million and more. This for properties of $8 million and more would increase it by 5%. And in 2020, the voters in San Francisco approved a measure that applies pretty similar tax rate. Theirs is a little more complicated because they have many more gradations, but as relevant to overlapping with us, anything from $10 million up to $25 million in San Francisco they passed would be 5.5%, and anything above 25 would be 6%. The proposed measure doesn't change the existing set of exemptions beyond those that were adopted by the Santa Monica voters in 2020 through Measure SM. I think there have been some questions about that. The principal exemption that was in there was for if properties being transferred for affordable housing purposes. So if it's acquired by either a nonprofit or acquired by a partnership where, the person that controls a nonprofit and it's being used for deed restricted affordable housing, it is exempt from this measure. It's exempt from all property tax, I should be clear. And that's what's in existing laws adopted by the voters in 2020, and our measure did not try and change any of the exemptions or do anything about that. The expectation is that the funds will essentially go 80% to homelessness prevention, affordable housing, and 20% to the schools. The specific mechanism by which that will happen is that the first 10 million will go into a new city fund that, a school fund that would be for transfer to the school district, or should there be unification with Malibu, which I think most people here know, that's a strange term, but it means that if there ends up being a separate Malibu school district and a separate Santa Monica school district, then it would remain with the Santa Monica school district. How those funds will be spent will be determined by the separate governmental entity, the school district itself, pursuant to their financial oversight procedures that they have. The next 40 million then would go into a new sub-fund, into the Housing Trust Fund, which would be spent, as I'm going to describe below, and subject to new oversight procedures that I'm also going to describe below. And then anything above 50 million would be 20 cents on the dollar would go to the school fund, and 80% to the Housing Trust Fund sub-fund that I described. Obviously, what exactly will be generated is just a matter of opinion and projection, and there's a lot of factors in the world, but we do think that we should be able to generate $50 million a year or more on this as we go forward. In the last non-COVID calendar year, so 2019, this would have generated over $61 million, but there's variability and the like. So we think that 50 million seems like a reasonable estimate. There's some other factors that go into that. The measure expressly states that it's the voters' intent that this money whether it's for SMMUSD or for the homeless prevention affordable housing, is not to replace any of the existing money that's going there. I think most people here probably know, but the city already provides some funds to the school district pursuant to prior measures that were passed by the voters, measures Y and YY, and then, as I think I mentioned earlier, half of the GSGSH money was for the schools, and any other money that the city might be transferring, and the same thing on the side of the affordable housing. In other words, the point of this is not to replace existing funding, it's to give us new funding to allow us to expand programs. So with respect to the money that goes into the new sub-fund and the housing trust fund, since that is ultimately within the control of the city and the city council, here's what the measure says, that up to 6%, forgive me, of that can be used for administration. And I want to say that there's some important things that having more money to administer the funds would be important to. So for example, we now, after several years, are moving forward on putting affordable housing in place of the earthquake damaged parking structure on 4th Street. But it's taken a long time to get just to this point. And part of that had been that there was limited resources, and the city council prior to that had chosen to direct those towards other things. You know, we don't want to see that kind of every 3 years we managed to get a project. If we had additional staff that could be dedicated to these kinds of programs, we can make a lot more progress a lot faster. And then you need, if you're going to greatly expand the rent subsidy program, which I'll describe in a second, you know, we're going to need more people to do that. These things can't just happen without resources. And we also want to make sure that there's appropriate oversight and reporting on these things. So I think it is important to have, you know, administration funds. The next thing is of what's left after the administration. So no less than 30% of what's left after that, and no more than 50% can be used for either ongoing rent subsidy, which would be things like our Preserve Our Diversity program, but it could be expanded, you know, far beyond just those seniors who met some pretty stringent criteria that we came up with when we had limited money to do that. Rent burden people, it could include families with children, it could include those with mental health issues, it could include people who moved in more recently than 2000, which was actually one of the requirements for the Preserve Our Diversity pilot program, or for emergency rent subsidy. As we mentioned before, when you have people who are on the edge, you know, something can come up, an unexpected bill of some kind or a job interruption or whatever. We don't want people to lose their homes. Then the city has some programs along those lines, but this would allow us to expand that. And this would be for low-income households. Now, if it turns out that either initially or over time, you know, we don't need as much money for those things, you know, maybe the Biden administration will somehow manage to fully fund the Section 8 program and that would reduce it, or something like that. Then if money isn't used in a particular year, and the next year can go into the next category, which is about creating new affordable housing. And so, but whether there's a flow over or not, there would be no less than 50% of those non-administrative funds would be used for either acquisition and rehab or new construction or other creation of deed restricted affordable housing. And that would include not only for low income households, but also for moderate income households. Right now, there are still some rent control units that have initial rents that moderate income households can afford, but that is, deteriorating over time, and there's still probably a greater need for that than we have certainly in our supply in the city. So it would allow us to do that. And then anything that remains that isn't spent in those two categories could be used for other things. It could be, anything that would be programs or services to preserve the tenancies or to preserve the units serving lower moderate income households. These are just illustrative. They're not meant to be limiting, but, it could be increased code compliance enforcement, could be increased legal services, could be, loans or grants to landlords for earthquake retrofit or for other unit improvements if they're serving those households. And we could also put some money into a reserve fund so that, as needs change, there would be money there, or if there are, temporary ups and downs in what's being received. So how are we going to see how that money is spent? There will be a new resident oversight committee created to make recommendations to the council on an ongoing basis regarding, what the guidelines should be for the programs and how the funds should be allocated within those broader constraints that I just described. And that committee will consider a variety of things, but one of the things we want to be sure they consider is cost effectiveness of programs, and that's expressly called out. The city's auditors will audit the receipts and expenditures by the subfund on an annual basis and will publicly report their findings to both the audit subcommittee of the city council and to the resident oversight committee. The nature of the resident oversight committee membership will have 11 Santa Monica residents on it. At least 4 must be from lower income households. And at least 1 has to be a participant in one of the types of programs that rent subsidies that we're running here, whether that be Preserve Our Diversity program or some newly created program pursuant to this. We also have to have at least one senior, 1 has to have children. We need somebody with mental, physical challenges, at least 1, and at least 1 must be formerly homeless. And we want a mix of people, at least 2 of them have to be in our not deed restricted affordable housing, at least 1 has to be in our deed restricted affordable housing. So we get a good range of lived experience at a minimum. It can be broader than that. And then an additional 7 members can be from households of any income level. At least 1 of them has to have a background in affordable housing financing, 1 in affordable housing development, at least 1 have a legal background, at least 1 have an accounting background, at least 1 must have a background in homelessness prevention. I'm hopeful that we have people who would be anxious and willing to serve that could allow this if perchance, after best efforts by the council, they can't find people with one of these, who wants to serve on this and has the right background, then they can select somebody with a different expertise, but everybody will ultimately be from Santa Monica, and that will be an advisory group. So that's the basic outlines of the measure. It does not try and prescribe in any greater detail than that. I know there've been questions about, well, where will affordable housing be created? That's not prescribed by the measure. That's those kinds of issues, exactly how to do it, whether it will be acquisition rehab or new creation or whatever it is, whether it be on public land, whether it be acquiring all those kinds of issues are things that, rather than trying to bake into the measure, create a mechanism for actual thought, careful thought about that. And ultimately the political elected leadership of the community will have responsibility for that. And obviously it can be changed over time in that manner. So I'm sure I apologize that there are other questions that I have failed to answer in this, and we can pick those up in the Q&A. But I guess I want to say this, I'm sure nobody views any measure as exactly what they, if they had the pen, would write exactly. But, we have had this problem in Santa Monica of all of these rent burdened, low income households. And we have the funding challenge of how are we going to create new affordable housing to uncrowd people here, to bring in, folks who were displaced by the Civic Center, by the courthouse, by the 10 freeway, how we're going to make a fair place for people who sweat equity we're all, benefiting off of. And I don't feel folks can wait. I mean, this is here, this is real. We are going to be out there. We will be gathering signatures. And this is a chance to do something really meaningful for these folks in the community. And I hope that we'll get your support at this stage, just that we should, as a club, go ahead and support getting signatures and giving the voters of Santa Monica a choice as to whether they want this. So I think with that, I will shut up, and I appreciate everybody's patience for my long presentation here.
I'm unmuted. Okay, so there were questions. So first of all, thank you, Michael, for that very detailed presentation. And you've actually dispensed with some of my job, because questions were sent to me. I looked them all over. I kind of distilled some of them, saw what some questions that more than one person had. I think you've answered actually most of them in your presentation. So I'm just going to pick through the questions that were sent in advance for any details that might not have been covered. People had asked about the need for this. I think you really well covered the need as far as affordable housing. However, some of the funds would go for education. And what do you see as the need there? And why did you put in that % for education?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is, so from my perspective, and I'll say this as someone who is a product, who was a renter, comes from a renter household, who, wasn't low income. I was somewhere in the middle, but who went to excellent public schools, not here. I lived in Ohio and New York, but, junior high school and high school in Ohio, benefited from that. Both the ability to help low-income children to thrive comes from our public schools, and I think that there's not a problem in my mind of further investment. I also want to bring in, as you heard, more lower-income families and children. I want to be sure that the school districts have the money. How exactly they should spend it to best assure not only that those children, but all of our children continue to get an excellent public education, which is also important to making sure that all of our children, hopefully in the next generation, won't need this. It's not my area of expertise, and I wouldn't pretend to do it, but there's a wide range of things that they could do, whether it's, these new pre-TK program that they're standing up, to use it for that, whether it's to use it to be able to continue to recruit or even create housing for teachers and other workers from the district, whether it's programs to do the close the achievement gap, whether it's anything else that will improve it, I leave to them. But I do feel that an important component to what we're trying to do here, which is to make Santa Monica a place where low-income households, many of whom will include children, obviously not all, can live and thrive, means we have to have great public schools. And so it's appropriate to have continued investment in that as well.
Okay. So you did pretty well explain about the percentage, but some people had a question about how you came up with the 5% figure. And also maybe there's a question, a point of information. So someone said, this is from Jay Johnson, the current transfer tax is 1.25, would the 5% be in addition? So I know you said that this would bring it to 5.6, so I'm not quite sure how those
Yeah.
things reconcile.
So Jay, you know, it's so complicated here. The actual existing tax rate is 0.3% up to a property worth 5 million and 0.6% on anything above 5 million. So the maximum existing transfer tax right now in Santa Monica is 0.6%. And so this for properties of $8 million or more would add 5% to that for a total of 5.6%. The 5% is inspired by what was done in San Francisco and what people were talking about. In fact, they're doing in the city of LA. There was some hope that there might be a county-wide thing, but due to failure of certain state bills, that wasn't possible. That's what people are talking about. So that would put us consistent with San Francisco, consistent with what LA is trying to do on its measure for 2022.
Okay, so that clears that up. And
And let me just say, and also because it raises meaningful dollars that will allow us to do important things. Sorry.
I think I know the answer to this, but there was a question if this is a tax on the net gain or the gross sale. I think it's on the
It's on the gross sale.
Yeah, okay.
I understand sort of the logic behind those kinds of things, but at the end of the day, that's not in our judgment administratively possible or what people do in any other jurisdiction.
Okay. So yeah, some of the, and I see people's hands are raised, so don't worry, we will get to that. I'm just right now going over the questions that were submitted ahead of time. So you did answer the question about how much money would be raised by this. Thank you. And you talked about the oversight committee. There were a number of questions about that. Who would oversee this? I think you went over that in detail. And you also said that there would be no exemptions. So maybe there were a number of people who asked questions about that, and maybe you could talk about why. And I'm going to mention some of the exemptions that people wanted and why you decided not to have those.
So let me just answer that last question first.
Okay.
The decision was that the city already has a transfer tax, that the voters voted on that in 2020 and has existing exemptions. We didn't try and rewrite the existing exemptions. So it's not that we then went through a series of other exemptions and said, well, should we change the existing exemptions? It was, we were adopting the background law and simply changing the tax rate.
Okay, and to be clear, then it's commercial and residential?
Any property that's worth $8 million or more.
Okay. So some people are questioning, oh yes, so then it was brought up that I guess Culver City, do they have a similar initiative? Or I'm not sure if the comparisons are to an initiative being proposed in Culver City or
They had an initiative.
They had an initiative, okay. So
which passed.
Okay, so it passed. Okay, I wasn't sure what the status was. So, okay, so people were comparing to the one in Culver City. I would say that they have an exemption for newly constructed multifamily properties. I think the point there is that would this hurt new housing by having an increased transfer tax on multifamily properties? Would that actually kind of be working against what you're trying to do in creating more housing?
Well, I'm not trying to create more housing.
Well,
because no, I'm sorry, this is an important point.
Okay.
Housing is not fungible. There's a difference between market rate housing and housing that serves the people that I'm talking about, which are low and moderate income families who the market in Santa Monica does not serve, and who McKinsey has confirmed, everybody knows, will not have their needs met no matter what we do with market rate housing. We are not going to be driving down the price of housing overall in the marketplace to serve them. So we need direct interventions for them. Now, San Francisco, the LA proposed measure, whatever, don't have whatever this provision is in Culver City. I don't Our problem in Santa Monica has not been creating market rate housing. I can pull out the exact figures from the housing element, but we actually in the last RENA cycle created as much market rate housing as we're being asked to create in this RENA cycle. And that's before the things that are in our housing element that are designed to try and make it even more attractive to create market rate housing in the city. We actually have, if you take what's already been approved for market rate housing, plus what's in the pending requests, and if you add in the Gelson's project, which wasn't even in the calculations there, we're already, before we even get started, at 60% of our entire market rate housing requirement for the year, for the entire next housing element. So I'm not sure that there is any deterrent here, because if you're someone who builds it and then operate it, you don't pay anything until you actually transfer it. If there really ever was a problem, there are other ways the city can address that. But the critical thing, which has not been met in any housing element around the state, is dealing with people who are suffering this incredible rent burden and are low income. And that's who we're trying to help here.
Okay. So I think that covers, I mean, we had other questions that were sent in, but those were the broadest ones that were shared by more than one person. And I see we have a number of hands up. So I think I'm going to go to the people who are here and have their hands up, and we're going to go in the order that you raised your hand. So Denny Zane, would you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Well, actually, I have a comment that is relevant to some of the questions that were asked earlier. One of the question about why now, in addition to the fact that there is a very severe housing crisis for low income and moderate income households, right now we have the opportunity to win a voter initiative by a majority vote. That is not an opportunity we can be confident of going forward. That opportunity was created by court decisions, and there is a constitutional amendment proposed now collecting signatures that would try to prevent that. It's a so-called loophole in Prop 13 that the court only recently identified. If we don't do it now, we might not ever be able to have a majority vote for anything of this scale. I think it is important for you to know that the base year that we use for calculations, 2019, the formulation that Mike articulated means the tax would have applied to just a little over 5% of all the sales. 95% of sales would not have been taxed. I also think, for clarification purposes, although I think Alex Fitch is here, I think in Culver City, they did not do an initiative. I think it was a general purpose tax that the council put on the ballot, and general purpose taxes require only majority vote. Alex can confirm, I think.
Okay, so is that mainly a statement? Were you wanting any response to that, or you just wanted to?
Well, I've been working closely with Mike on this for quite some time, and so all my questions have been answered.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's go on to Kate Blandino, or Kat, sorry.
Hi, thank you. I just want to preface this with my background. I am a single mother, renter, with 2 elementary children in public schools in SMUSD. So I want that to sort of frame what my questions that I want to ask. I really feel that this notion is really noble. It's what we want to do, right? We want to help those who are less privileged than ourselves. It's great. But what is this? This does not make any sense at all. And here are my questions that I would really love some answers to. The committee, the 11-person committee that will be appointed and not elected, get basically full say of a large amount of money. We're talking 50 million with no accountability,
of how this is being spent to
I-
voters or taxpayers? Sorry, does someone want to say something?
No, I just, rather than giving a list of questions, if I can respond one at a time. So this is an advisory committee to the city council. The
Right.
actual decisions will be made by the city council, which are elected by the people of Santa Monica.
Okay, and what about the percentage of the money that goes towards SMMUSD?
That will be controlled by the school board of SMMUSD, which is elected by the people of Santa Monica and Malibu right now.
Right, and when will that be released? When would those funds be released to them, and would there be any hold on how that is spent?
It would be on an annual basis, and how it's spent would be the responsibility of the school board of SMMUSD, or if there's unification, the successor Santa Monica district.
Right, so we're saying nothing would just, okay. And then regards to, this is basically going to hurt the revitalization of our commercial sector in Santa Monica. Point blank, that's what we're saying. It's
I
gonna
understand
make us
that's your opinion. I
uncompetitive.
don't share it.
Pardon?
This only happens when people sell their property, so there is no reason why this should harm. Excuse me,
when
let
we
me
walk
finish my
down-
answer. Excuse me, let me finish my answer.
I mean, I think I was
Uh,
speaking first as a public.
Oh, I
speaker, but
apologize. Go ahead.
When we
I'll wait
walk
for you.
down 3rd Street Promenade, do we not see the amount of for sale signs and the amount of empty storefronts? Like, please do not do that sort of condescending level. Like, this is our city.
Okay. Kat, I
And we
understand
care.
that you oppose this. I don't believe if they're for sale, they'll be sold. You know, if there's a reason to sell it, they'll sell it. If there isn't a reason to sell it, they'll keep it.
Okay, for all the for sale signs that are up, and we are not revitalizing our commercial sector in aka making our city sustainable, what are we doing? This is not a sustainable plan.
All right, Kat, did you have any other questions?
Yes, I do. Or did you want to cut me off? But I do, yes.
Well, I have other people.
Where is the agreement on with with SMMUSD where that money's being spent, and who will have a say in that percentage of money that goes to our schools and how it will be spent? How will that be worked?
It'll work exactly the same way that GSGSH, YY, and other transfers from the city right now work, which is they go to SMMUSD, and that the elected officials there decide how best to spend it on behalf of our kids.
I mean, I just sort of get the impression that there is no other voice here, right? The voice is just to accept this.
Okay, Kat.
So
everyone-
just to
I think I
if
wanna-
I could just
No, I
respond
would
to that
actually
1
like to
second.
speak, and Mike would like to answer me, so thank you. Thank you,
Okay,
Mike.
but we do have to limit the time. We have other people who would also. like
Okay,
to
tell
speak.
me what my time is, and I will limit my
Okay, can you limit this to
comments
one
to
more
that time.
minute? Can you limit this to one
So-
more minute, please?
So what I wanted to say is this, is that we had this problem for a long time. I have not seen anybody else bring forward anything to try and address these issues. We're trying to bring this forward now. If you think that overall it's better to leave the situation that it is now and have no prospect for actually creating anything going forward, you're entitled to that opinion, and you will have a vote tonight. You will have a vote.
I would like to address that
excuse me,
before I
I'm
get
not
cut off,
finished.
but yes, please continue, but I just don't want to
Thank
get
you.
cut off, but please.
But I'm
continue.
just saying is that we believe that this will be good for the city and good for the people. And so, yes, we're moving forward with this.
I would like to know how many Santa Monica families, not just the percentage, because percentages can be fixed, what the numbers of Santa Monica families who are actually experiencing homelessness and or overcrowded situations and unstable
All
living
right, yeah,
conditions.
excuse
And
me,
Santa
I think
Monica.
I am gonna have to cut you off.
Right.
This question- I'm sorry, this question was answered in the presentation.
No, it was not. No, it was
And-
not. It was
Okay.
percentages and not numbers. It was
Can
not.
we cut off her mic? She's taking up the
No,
entire.
that's okay.
All
I
right,
think
Mayor Sue.
I think that we may see if we can provide a way for you to ask additional.
This is not a
questions.
democratic process. This is not a democratic club.
I'm sorry.
Let's just make that like.
Hang up.
Okay.
You're,
Okay, we're gonna move on to the next person, Hoffman.
Can I just share, I wanted to share this, the
Yes.
one slide that
Okay,
I think is responsive to what. So here, these are numbers, not percentages.
yeah. these are-
So here are the 6,000, roughly 6,500 households. And I can't tell you because they don't tell us whether these are 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but there are 6,500 households that HUD's estimating that are both low income and paying more than 50% rent. Here's, if you include people who are just 30% total, it comes out to about 9,500 households. It's 2 out of every 10 renter households in the city, which are, you can see here is 32,495. So that comes to roughly 2 out of 10 for are both low income and severely rent burdened, and another roughly 1 out of 10 that are not more than 50%, but they're somewhere greater than that. So these are numbers, not percentages.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Okay, now we're gonna move on to, the last name is Hoffman.
Hi, Patricia Hoffman here.
I
and
know you, but
I know. I do want to move that we support this, but I'm going to pull back and wait and let all the people whose hands are up speak first. I think that that the fact that people are taking the initiative to try and solve the problems that we have is wonderful. And I know, Kat, for example, you have you're part of a group that's created a PAC to elect people to the school board. And if you're successful on that, then the people whom you elect will be the people who will be making the decisions about how money is spent in the school district. This is a real giant step forward to self-sufficiency and sustainability, and taking care of the people in our community who need the most help. So you know, my hat's off and my heart's out to you for creating this initiative. And like I say, Isabel, when we get to the point of making a motion, I would be honored to make such a motion.
okay, yeah, we're gonna have a few more questions, and then we will have a vote. At the end of the questions, we are gonna have a vote. Okay, well, Sue, since you're one of the proponents, did you have something you wanted to say right now?
Yeah, I do. And I do want to talk about the fact that Michael and I became involved in politics in Santa Monica, although we have been involved in some politics, mostly charitable work, I would say, for our entire marriage. And it was one of the commitments we made to each other. But we got involved in Santa Monica because of a housing issue at Village Trailer Park. I work at Western Center on Law and Poverty. And we are doing this because this is something we've been working on throughout the time we've been involved in the city. I am not running for office again. I think most of you know that. This is our swan song. I'm not running for anything. We get nothing from this. This is a pledge we made to each other in our lives, and we are fulfilling it. We did it with GS and GSH, and we're doing it here because there's no better leverage to create more of a safety net for people who have not been as lucky as Michael and I have been, as doing a measure like this that will provide affordable housing and more educational opportunity in a place like Santa Monica. So I want to make it clear that this is not, despite what many of you believe, that everybody has an angle. We don't have an angle here other than our commitment to each other and simply because we've been lucky to give back. So I want to make that clear here.
Okay,
And thank you, Isabel. for the
Yeah.
opportunity.
okay, well, thank you, Sue, and knowing you that is very meaningful, what you just expressed. Thank you. Okay, Jay Johnson is next.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I assume you can hear me okay?
Yep.
And I'm involved with Progressive Landlords of Santa Monica. I have sent in some questions, of which most have been answered, so I want to thank Michael for getting those details as well. A few remaining in particular. On the statistics that have been quoted at the beginning of the slideshow about the rent burden population and the HUD numbers, is that traditionally the numbers I've seen represent a family of 4? Is that still the number that's being used when you quote the rent burden? Is it a family of 4 or different?
My understanding is that this is based on if it's adjusted for family size, because they do try and in the American Community Survey try and understand that. So the base number is a family of 4, but there are some adjustments. So I think it's intended to try and calculate that.
I'd be interested to see what the family of 1, who is usually the people that rent the 1-bedroom apartments anyway. Is this a city transfer tax in addition to the county documentary transfer tax, or both?
This is the city, what the city does. So there are a number of cities, Culver City being one, Santa Monica being one. I think LA may actually have something as well that do their own. And this is only about what we do as a city.
I understand. My point is that if we have a county tax, which I thought was around 1%, a documentary transfer tax, in addition to the city tax, we're talking 6% or more.
I can answer that question.
Yes, go ahead.
This county tax is set by state law. Every county has the same level of taxation on this, and it's 0.11%. So it's not 1%. It's a little over 1/10 of a percent.
0.11.
0.11.
I see. Thank you. So this is primarily a city transfer tax that would go on top of whatever the county transfer tax
It's
is.
only a city tax, yes.
Is there a sunset clause to the proposal?
No,
No. Does the proposal conflict with existing state laws? I'm thinking of, I believe, Senate Bill 2, which I sent an email to you, Michael, that limited the amount of the tax to $225, but I'm vague on that one.
that's not my understanding. It conflicts with any state law.
Okay. Does the 8 million amount have an inflation clause and automatically increase yearly with inflation?
No,
No, it does not. Okay. Would the city of Santa Monica's affordable housing funding and contributions by the city budget to Community Corp in particular, but others, would that be replaced by this new proposal?
the measure says the intent of the voters is that this be in addition, so it should not be. So in other words, for example, the GSH funds, which is right now our principal source of funds, should continue to flow to the Housing Trust Fund.
But I believe there's been other significant contributions by City Council direct to Community Corp, and I can remember a couple of million here, a couple of million there, but it's part of usually one-time money, and that's why I'm asking, would it replace what the city is paying?
So let me just, Jay, because I want to be sure I'm answering your question. So if there's money that the city is doing, the expressed intent of the voters that's in this measure is that the city will continue to do what it's doing. This is to allow us to have more. If what you mean by replace is the fact that, for example, we're no longer getting the RDA funds and the one-time funds we got back have now been expended, is it replaced in the sense of it allows us to do what we're able to do with that? It more than replaces it.
Right. Well, also the city, as Tara just commented in the chat about the loans that are given by the city, but some of those loans are extremely long, and there's questions of when they're they're actually paid back. But I would get beyond that. Just a couple of more things. Will the projects be joint ventures with for-profit developers or only community corp?
This measure doesn't say anything about what the program should look like for doing this. So whatever the city sets, the city council sets as the policy is what.
Okay, no, that's answered. Thank you. Now, if you use, just a quick calculation on the 40 million number that was thrown out, 80% of that affordable housing. A couple of latest projects I've seen are going from 600 to 800,000 per unit. That means we'll be creating 53 units out of the $40 million. That doesn't sound very much to me, 53 units.
Yeah, so let me make a couple of statements about that. So first of all, and I think I showed you a chart, this is, I share with you the fact that obviously it's expensive to create a new deed restricted affordable housing. And that's one reason why when we can do rent subsidy for current people, I think we can help a lot more folks immediately quicker. There are other things that we can do to reduce the cost. The unit cost you're talking about is the actual cost. Much of what we produce in Santa Monica is leveraged through tax credit program. The city council is committed in the housing element for significant portions of public land in the city that we already own, which will greatly reduce the cost, because now we're only talking about what we're going to do on top of, once we already have the land. So for example, the 4th Street Garage project is not looking for any additional city funds to create, I forget the exact number there, something like 140 units and the like. And of course, we all hope that technology and other things will allow those costs to be brought down, whether it's through containers, 3D printing, whatever it all is, that there are ways to manage the cost. So hopefully these dollars can go a lot more than taking the total cost and dividing it by the amount that's going into new construction or acquisition rehab. And acquisition rehab is often less expensive on a per unit basis too. I guess the last thing I would say, and I apologize for those people who really know me, yes, I'm too much of a detail person, but the metric I think we should be using is bedrooms, not units, because, for example, as I said earlier, if we create a 3-bedroom unit for a family, it actually costs a little bit more to create, but on a per bedroom basis, it's actually cheaper. So that's probably the metric we ought to be looking at.
And last thing, in effect, as I understand it, the Housing Authority has a standard means test, which is given to persons applying for affordable housing projects. I assume that will continue, and hopefully it could be expanded to regular market rate units throughout the city as far as means tests, which the rent board has refused to do for as long as I've been around. But I think that would be an important first step. I think this whole proposal is fraught with issues because it winds up being paid by the multifamily property owners as well as the commercial property owners. If I understand the 8 million number, someone said there's a stair step of a 3 million number, a 5 million number, and then an 8 million. Is it true that it's only for 8 million above, or does it apply somehow to people below in the 3 to 5 million?
No, what we're proposing adds a new tier that only starts at $8 million.
Right.
Of course, it's only paid if you sell the property. It's not paid while you continue to operate the property and earn your income that way.
And then when Patricia makes a motion to adopt the proposal to circulate the petitions, I would like to make a substitute motion that we table this idea till the next meeting, where all the details and feedback from stakeholders would be involved. And I appreciate the chair affording me that opportunity. Thank you.
Well, I will have to consult with the parliamentarians among us for how that would work, but let's get to the end of the questions and then we'll deal with that.
Thank you, Michael, for answering the questions.
Thank you, Jay.
Okay.
And Jay, obviously, and anybody here, to the extent you have questions that didn't get answered tonight, feel free to reach out.
Okay, let's go on to Danielle. Danielle, if you want to unmute yourself.
Are you asking Danilo Bach? This is Margaret
No,
Bach.
Danielle Charney was the next person. with the hand raised.
Hi, a lot of my questions were answered by Michael. Thank you.
Okay,
I did. I'm unmuted.
okay, thank you.
Am I not unmuted?
No, we can hear you.
You're unmuted. You said your questions were answered?
Do you have any more questions, Danielle?
Okay, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We
hear
can
you.
hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, you can hear me.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, do you
Danielle.
have any further questions? Do you have any questions?
No, I didn't. I said some of them, and I do have other questions that I would.
Okay,
Yes, I do. I would like to offer them up. Yes,
okay, go ahead, please.
Jesus. Yes, my God. Yes. I guess what concerns me is that I really don't feel the school board should be getting another cent from anything, nor should SMC, because look, I give up. This is impossible. You know, I can't figure out whether I'm being heard or not, and I keep being
Yes, you're being
interrupted. I have
heard.
no idea what's going on.
Okay, well, I
So
guess.
I don't know
Danielle
what to
doesn't-
say, other than it seems that we spend way too much per unit with community core. We spend way too much when there's multis for sale all over Santa Monica that average out to 300 to 400. I'm trying to speak. Am I being heard or not?
You are
Yes.
being heard.
Just relax, say what you
I
want to say.
can't, you know, I keep getting interrupted. I have no idea if I'm being even heard.
You're being heard. Can you
Never
hear
mind.
us?
I give up. This is impossible. Goodbye.
I'm sorry for those.
Okay, then please
kind
let
of
me speak and don't
technical
interrupt me
issue.
because I keep being told that I'm getting not heard. So it seems to me the money is,
Okay, I think we're gonna have to move on. I think Danielle is freezing and there's a technical issue. Okay, let's go to Danilo Bach.
Hello, this is Margaret.
it's absolute bullshit.
Using Danilo's iPad, a couple questions. One is, I think just from a kind of political and sort of communications point of view, the term homelessness prevention maybe needs to be refined a little bit. I know one's trying to find words, sort of simplify and reducing the intent of the initiative with a simpler language. But I think that maybe, how should I put it? I think this may be a double-edged sword here, because I think there are a large swath of voters who feel that they have voted for at the county level initiatives for housing and so on, and of course, but are still seeing homelessness as a community issue from what they see on the streets every day. My sense is, from hearing Michael's very detailed and very informative presentation, that really the prevention aspect is really dealing with construction, that is production of housing, as well as subsidies. And so my question for Michael really is whether dollars are better spent with subsidies rather than production, knowing that the land is scarce and you know, of the difficulty of getting anything built in this community.
So thank you, Margaret. So what we mean by homelessness prevention means keeping people who are housed. So yes, the rent subsidy program, like POD, is designed to do that. Emergency rent subsidy. There can be other things that are designed to do that. It may be legal services, it could be code enforcement, a variety. But the main point is to keep people housed, because it's a lot less expensive to keep people housed than it is to let them go on the streets and then try and do it. And the point that we're trying to make, which the homelessness count from pre-COVID from 2020 is that it doesn't do us, if we're trying to eliminate homelessness, it's not simply about getting people who are currently unhoused, housed, but it's preventing more people from falling into the streets and the economic pressures on low-income renters from these intolerable rent burdens is what is increasingly driving people into the street and making the population actually grow. So that's what it is. The affordable housing, yes, obviously, if we have people who are on the streets, we could have supportive housing. That's not, I mean, that's not really what we were thinking about with the term homelessness prevention. That's those people are homeless. That's addressing that separate issue, and that there are other principal pots of money for dealing with that. So I hope that's responsive. There are other reasons to create new affordable housing. As I said, if we're going to maintain economic diversity in our city, we're going to have to do that, because otherwise there won't be any place as these, because there's going to be turnover of existing low-income folks. And if they're in rent control units, which is the only place that they could potentially be affording right now, even with these rent burdens, when they leave, they're not going to be replaced by other low-income people. And it also allows us to address these other issues of dealing with allowing people to return to our community and allowing people who are not here already, but who are contributing heavily to our community through their work to have a place in our community.
I think that's an important distinction. And I think as one rolls out the campaign to the community, there may be some hiccups, because Santa Monicans how Santa Monicans experience with homelessness are the folks on the street who need supportive housing. It's not they may or may not, but my sense is they're not necessarily on the street because of the absence of rent subsidies. It could be possibly that, but there are other issues, and there are so I think that is just the complication of trying to promote an initiative that is predicated on homelessness prevention. I think I just made my point, but
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have a couple people's hands up who have already spoken, but there's one who has not spoken yet. That's Sonia. So why don't we take you, and then we can circle back to the people who have already spoken.
Oh, hi. Yeah, just real quickly. I am very impressed with the quality of this initiative. I'm sure it won't solve every problem, but it will really help solve a lot of very important problems and help a lot of people. I think it reflects our community values at their best. And I really would also not want to delay a vote on this, because this is happening, and this initiative is going to be gathering signatures. And I, for one, really want to get on board with it. And I think, we don't have time. Just look around us at the escalation of expenses, inflation. And I think more and more people without this will be pushed toward homelessness. And I think that would be really a shame when we can get together and try to do something about it. And I really appreciate this initiative being brought forward. And I think the time is now. And I hope that everybody will, or almost everybody, will vote to support it. Thank you. Thanks, Mike and Sue.
Okay. I think we should be starting to think about wrapping this up. I see a few more hands up. So what I'm going to ask now is if the remaining people can speak, but for no longer than 1 minute. We'll give you each 1 minute. And then we will proceed to motion. So I'm going to call on Graham Rigby. You haven't spoken yet.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? I'm using my
Yes.
headphones right now. Great. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Graham. I'm a new member of the club. I moved to Santa Monica about 9 months ago. I have been a Democratic Party employee and activist in a lot of places around the country, so excited to get more involved with this group. I did have a question. I'm sorry I was late in getting the questions. I had some work to finish, but thank you, Michael, for that presentation. I just had a quick question. I was wondering about the $8 million threshold, very for higher rates of taxation, and I really applaud the effort taken into crafting this. But I'm just thinking that there's a lot of pretty valuable property in this city owned by people who are quite well-to-do compared to the American average that I think might be under $8 million. So I'm just wondering like how that was chosen, and would love to get more info on that. And I'd love to just hear more about Culver City's initiative. I know Alex Fish posted in the chat about it, but I'd love to hear about what they did as well. So just expressing that. Thank you all.
Sure. So, you've sort of seen when going to what San Francisco did and passed in 2020, and the levels at which they started kicking in these kinds of levels of taxation. So actually our 8 million is a little bit below where they kick in at 5.5 up there. So it's a combined that the amount of money that would be raised from anything lower is not that great, and trying to craft something that seems to have worked in San Francisco, voters went for, and do it here to win, because ultimately we don't get anywhere if we don't have a winning measure.
Okay, and Denny, if you can come back on, but limit your comments or question to 1 minute, please.
Yeah, yes, just for clarification, I have been part of the development team here with Mike, and so I'm responding to some other questions that were raised. So for example, I think, Jay, you should understand that most affordable housing layers multiple sources of financing. And so, for example, in a given project, Santa Monica's share of the financing might be 150,000, not 800,000. Community Corporation could probably give us the actual figures. So when you calculate the number of units that would actually generate, it's going to be far more than the 40 you talked about.
Okay. Who was your question addressed to, Denny? Is someone responding?
I think Denny was trying to answer a question that
Oh, he's answering. Okay.
he thought that my answer could be improved on, and you kept them to 1 minute.
Yeah.
So I'm
All right.
They said 800,000 a unit. This would give 50 units or something like that. And really, our share of that, whatever the full development cost, is a much smaller share. Community Corporation can tell us more precisely what they average.
Okay.
Santa
I
Monica
think
money.
Danielle has her hand raised. I know, Danielle, you were having technical issues. We're going to let you try again, but we're going to have to limit it like everybody else to 1 minute, please. Okay, Danielle, you're not.
Okay, very quickly.
Yes.
I believe other cities have a much higher transfer tax on lower amounts. Am I not right, Michael?
So for example, the Culver City kicks in
Do they in fact
at a
have
lower
higher
level in there. I think
transfer tax than we are asking for here?
I'm sorry, I was trying to answer your first question and I missed what you just said. So could you repeat that? The answer to your first question, Danielle, which was, are there other
About
places?
the rate of the transfer tax at cities like Berkeley and Beverly Hills and other places.
I can't quote you what Berkeley or Beverly Hills does. I know San Francisco has a 2.25% tax rate below the $10 million threshold, which goes down, and I'd have to pull out exactly where it is. I believe that Culver City's threshold for its 4% is below our threshold for our 5%. This is taking what Santa Monica has done now through a combination of the city council and what the voters approved in 2020 in Measure SM, and laying onto it one single additional level of 5%, which, as I explained to Mr. Rigby, why we selected that threshold to be 8 million.
Okay, I think that that was our last speaker, and I
Okay, so
understand yeah, I'm sorry. So we're going to move on now to the vote. So
So Isabel, I'm going to make the motion, and you asked a parliamentary procedure question. I'm going to make a motion, and then you're going to ask.
Elizabeth, can I ask another question, please?
I assume that there will.
I'm sorry, the Q&A section has ended now. So everybody is on mute except for, I believe there are 2 motions, and somebody is advising me on how to handle this in the parliamentary way.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion. You're going to say, Patricia made a motion. Is there a second? Someone will second it. And then Jace will raise his hand as he has now and say, I'd like to make a substitute motion. You'll ask if there's a second for the substitute motion, and undoubtedly there will be. At that point, you take you call the question on the substitute motion. If
Okay.
that motion wins, it prevails. If that motion fails, then we go back to my motion and you call the question on my motion.
Totally correct.
I got it. Thank you. This is learning on the job.
Okay.
So Patricia, what is your motion?
My motion is that we endorse the initiative and that we begin collecting signatures.
Second.
Madam Chairman, I propose a substitute motion to table the question before us pending a reconsideration at a future meeting with all the information and stakeholders have been involved.
Is there a second for that substitute motion?
I second the motion.
I second.
Who was the first person who said they seconded it?
Matt Millen.
Matthew
Matt
Miller.
Millen.
Oh, no, sorry, that I did Patricia's.
I would second that motion. Graham Rigby.
Okay, we only need 1 second. So who was the first person who
First
spoke
one
up?
to
Matt
second it,
Millen?
Matt Millen.
Matthew
Millen.
Millen.
Okay, so that motion made by Jay Johnson, seconded by Matt Millen to table this. So let's take a vote on that one.
Just point of information, majority vote would rule in this. Tara was asking in the chat how many votes for it to pass. Has to be a majority vote.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
so we are going to vote now. Is that right?
Excuse me, Isabel.
Yes.
John, is this going to be a show of hands vote? Or is this going to be?
Zoom hands.
Okay.
You'll do
Okay.
a show of hands, preferably so that it's easier to count. If you can use your virtual Zoom hand to vote, better.
Yes.
Hold-
We're gonna
hold-
do
everybody
it.
put
Yeah,
their hands
I
down.
did talk to John on how to do the vote. So we are going to take the vote. Raise your virtual hand on Zoom. And then for anybody who doesn't know how to do that or can't do that, we will raise physical hands.
Isabel, please say which one we're voting on now. Just state it as we
Okay,
start
right,
voting.
yes, I will state it. So right now
Thank
we are voting on the substitute motion, which is to table this question to a future meeting when we can have more information and all the stakeholders present. Raise your hand if you're in favor of that motion. Okay, I see 3 hands. Are there any more hands?
Matt Millen has a thumbs up. I think that's counted.
Okay, yeah, so tell me if, just now raise, okay, okay, raise your physical hand then if you can't raise your virtual hand. Did you see a fourth hand, John? I
There's,
don't see it.
there's 4 hands for yes. Now call the no.
Four. Oh, Matt Millen. Okay. Okay, 4 hands for yes. Okay, how many votes? Now put your hands down, please. Lower the hands.
Oh.
Lower the hands or you're gonna be.
Maybe
voting
someone who's
opposite.
a co-host could just lower all hands. They have that.
I had to
Okay,
click care of it.
okay, good. All hands are lowered. Who votes no on that motion? Okay, do we have to count if it's so overwhelming? Because it's obviously a majority voting no. I will
We
just,
need the number, Isabel,
You
we need
should-
the
you
number for
should
the record,
count.
for the vote.
we need the number for the record. Okay, that's probably.
You have
Peter's.
25 hands raised voting no.
Okay,
Plus, there's also 2 hands raised that don't have a Zoom hand up, so that comes out to 27.
okay, 25 virtual, 2 physical hand, 27 voting no. Okay, so let's lower the hands, please. And we will go
Now,
back.
Isabel, before we proceed,
Yes,
the original motion by Patricia,
Yes.
who have you recorded as seconding it? I seconded it, but there were
Sonia.
others also.
Sonia was the original second.
Sonia, okay, all right.
okay, so made by Patricia, seconded by Sonia. And just to refresh our memories now, Patricia, you want to restate your motion so we know what we're voting on?
To endorse the initiative and to start collecting signatures.
Well, you know what, can I suggest, I think the idea is just to endorse the collection of signatures and we would vote on whether to endorse the measure later.
You're correct, Isabel. That's a good point.
Can I, yeah. May I speak,
What was described
Isabel?
to me- Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yes,
Yes.
Michael.
I just wanted to say that at the exec meeting, it was agreed that at this point, the only thing we're asking for is that the club authorize the club to support, the gathering of signatures to put it on the ballot, that the actual endorsement or non-endorsement of the measure should go through our normal endorsement process if it gets on the ballot, which will, is in the bylaws and will proceed that way. So I think to be consistent with that, your suggested amendment, I hope would be deemed friendly to the makers.
Yes, even though there's no such thing as a friendly amendment, yes. I'll explain that to you in person. Isabel.
Okay, yeah, so we're voting to endorse, that the club endorses the collection of signatures for this ballot initiative. Okay, all
And
those.
Sonia needs to resecond the motion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 3-second.
Okay. Okay, so raise your hands if you are in favor of that motion. And can someone else count?
Don't let it see me.
I'll count, Isabel.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 27 virtual hands.
And do we have any physical hands or is,
No physical hands that I can see.
okay, everybody please lower your hands. Okay, I think all the hands are lowered. So now raise your, oh, Celia, your hand is still raised. Can you lower your hand? You know how to lower your hand?
How do I lower it?
Jay,
I
I
got
think
Celia,
there's a
you're
lot
good,
of-
you're good.
Jay, I
Good,
think there's
okay.
a lot of noise at your end.
Okay, so
Jay's
now,
house.
raise your hand if you're voting no on this motion. Okay,
I see 3 no's.
3
there more?
virtual hands, any physical hands? Okay, the motion passes. And,
You need to do abstentions.
oh,
There are people abstaining. I think you need to do that.
okay, all right. Does anyone want to abstain on this one? Okay, I don't see
I
any.
don't see any.
mentions. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so great information. Good luck. Our proponents have a lot of work ahead of them. And I guess that's it for tonight. Is there any other wrapping up?
One quick question for Michael, if I could, please.
I think I don't want to take any more questions. So can you just ask him offline? I'm ask him. You have his contact information, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, will the club, since almost all of us are proponents of this initiative, will the club be sending out information about how we can get involved in helping the signature drive?
It's a great question, Sonia, and thank you. I would want to say, first of all, thank you to the club for supporting this. And I think that the plan for Mike, Sue, and I is, now that we have the club's initial buy-in at this stage, to be able to reach out to the club members and let everybody know about how you can sign the signature, how you can sign the get signature gathering petition, and how you can help us to get more signatures from other people that you know. So that's definitely the next steps from the club, is we'll be reaching out in an email blast and also at the next club meeting about the next steps. I think, Mike, you were saying that the signatures gathering is going to be starting pretty soon, right?
Yeah, so tomorrow, the next step is we have to publish in the newspaper the notice of intent to do a petition and whatever. Interestingly, as a lawyer, I'm not an expert in this, and we've hired lawyers to do that. But so that will be printed in the newspaper tomorrow. And I anticipate we'll actually have petitions ready probably by the end of Friday. So that will be the point probably.
How many valid signatures do we need, Michael?
We need 10% of the registered voters. That number, which I should have the exact number, but it's roughly 6,800 valid signatures.
Okay.
Okay, well,
Quick question, Isabel. Michael, what's the deadline? What's the timeline for getting the signatures?
In an ideal world, we would finish by May 20th, but the absolute deadline is June 20th.
June what?
June 20th.
Thanks.
Ted, you have experience in this. Isn't city transfers taxes paid 50-50 buyer seller?
No, common practice these days is to have the sellers pay it.
The seller pays.
It's negotiable. It's like anything else in a contract.
Yes, it is negotiable. The information I have is 50-50, but like you say, it's negotiable. Thank you.
So Isabel,
yes,
if I may, I just want to say something about signatures, having collected signatures in 2018. And so the number is 6,800, but in fact, we'll need to collect a lot more to make sure that we have enough valid signatures, because all of these signatures are validated. Michael's laughing, right? And we will validate them as we go along. But I really believe this may be the hardest part of what we do. So any help we can get is so appreciated.
So we really need about 10,000 then, probably.
At least, that's right.
Yeah, I think 20 or 30% more you have to get just to cover yourself on
Right.
that.
So
That's
we'll be coming for everybody. Don't worry, if you're here, we'll be asking you to sign. Well, maybe not 3 of you.
Well, what we have to do is meet other people. Like anybody can get the 30 people here, right? But no, it just is a heavy lift. But I really,
Yeah, we have to carry them.
Right.
Yeah.
Physical.
And we'll also have a formal non-volunteer canvas as well.
I just want to thank everybody for supporting the signature gathering on this. This is a really important measure, and we hear people complaining on a daily basis about homelessness, about not enough affordable housing, and this doesn't solve the problems, but at least it's a step towards making a dent in them. And I'm really grateful for that. So thank you. And again, thank you, Michael and Sue and John for taking the initiative and moving this forward. That's all I can say. It's
And Isabel, you ran a great meeting. Good
Well,
job.
thank you.
Thank
Well, I
you,
think
Isabel.
I've.
Say one other
I've
thing.
now-
Isabel.
Thank you,
good
Isabel.
discussions, time to adjourn. So yes, we had a great meeting, great discussion and information. Thank you all for participating.
Can I just say one other
Can I say
thing, which
something?
is,
Okay.
I just
Everybody
want to
wants to
say,
get
I
the
know there's
last
some
word.
people who disagree. This is a democracy. People have the right to their opinions and, will ultimately be decided out there in the world. And I hope we can agree to disagree in a way that we're all Democrats and people have different views on different issues. So I appreciate even those people who don't agree with me on this issue. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna say good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Thank you. Oh, great job.
Thank you.
See everybody next week.
Bye. Bye.